One time.
You know, you have such an interesting history, as you mentioned, OCC, a part of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. You've worked at Merrill Lynch. You know, I want to ask you about one of the elements of this marijuana banking conversation that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is the costs of being unbanked. What are these costs of operating in cash? Because I don't think that's something that the layperson understands.
Sure. Quite a few costs. We can separate them into two categories, tangible and intangible. So tangible categories are, I think, sort of intuitive, right? If you have a lot of cash as a business, you have to provide physical security to essentially hold this cash. You have to reconcile it, actually physically count it. All those things cost money, right? It's hiring security guards, armored cars, cashless ATMs or ATMs, and then storing this cash somewhere.
And that makes sense, because another thing we've talked about on the program a lot is the rise of so many marijuana-centric security companies.
Absolutely.
When I got the first press release from a very big player in the space now in late 2013, I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, is there really a need for a marijuana-centric security firm? And now there's 10 or 20 of them in this state alone. So, okay, yeah, that's sure. Tangible.
Absolutely, and these guys are not shy about kind of letting the world know what they're doing. I just met the CEO of one a couple of months ago, and he basically told me that they have 250 million in a warehouse sitting somewhere. It's just insane to
Wow.
maintain this kind of cash. So that's definitely tangible. Intangible, in my opinion, is a lot more important category. Because a lot of even business owners, frankly, don't recognize the issue of dealing with cash, those intangible costs. Even if it costs you 10%, 20% to operate in cash due to shrinkage or security, you don't necessarily recognize the fact that, for instance, your transactions are much smaller because they're conducted in cash. A person walks into a dispensary with a certain amount in their pocket. They rarely go to an ATM to withdraw more, or if they go to an ATM, they'll take a certain amount and they spend it. Versus an electronic transaction that allows that freedom for a consumer to purchase as much as they want and tip, quite frankly, a lot more liberally. And that's on average, if you look at other industries, transaction that's done electronically is on 25-30% larger than a transaction in cash. So that's one of those intangible costs. Then I think the biggest one is being essentially kept out of the larger economy. Businesses that cannot plug in lawfully into the banking system are on the outskirts of the greater economy, if you will, of the banking system. And that is problematic for so many reasons. We have essentially a population, in this case commercial, population that's kept out of participating in the great economy. And this population is growing at exponential rates no matter what, but banking services are essential. They're no longer, banking is no longer a privilege. It's one of those rights that I think citizens have in this country. And here you have a great portion of Americans that have no access to banking that are kept in this gray sort of economy. So they're essentially forced back into the black market by the system. So it's a really unique conundrum that we're hoping to solve.
And part of that is lending, I'm guessing, that you're referencing. Like if somebody has one shop and they want to expand, how do they do that?
Certainly, it's a whole suite of banking services. Lending is definitely one of them. But the most basic function of banking is depository services. If we look at the history of banks, the early banks were essentially temples. Your trust brokers of the Mesopotamia were the temples. And these temples would allow people to essentially bring their assets, and they would secure those assets for them. And of course, they began to lend those things. The banks supposed to be the trust brokers of the community, and they're not performing this function, not effectively anyway.